In this episode, I talk with Cliff Ravenscraft about the 11 proven steps to build and grow your online business and where online courses fits into the process.
Welcome to the Online Course Coach Podcast, brought to you by TrueFocusMedia.com. Whether you're a beginner or expert, this is the podcast for the latest in online course creation tips, news, interviews, and ideas. And here's your coach, Jeff Long.
Welcome back to another episode of the Online Course Coach Podcast. If you're brand new to the podcast, or if you've been listening to some time, you may already know that this is really the podcast where I get to interview authentic industry experts about their successes, their online courses, and how they've gotten to the point they are now, but really how we as a listener can apply those same principles to our businesses, to our courses, and to our lives. So my background includes corporate training for Fortune 500 companies and working with experts and influencers to create custom learning management systems, produce engaging course videos, marketing courses, and everything in between. So it is my goal to help take my extensive experience and help you create an online course or improve your existing courses so you can impact more people. Hey, before we get into the show with Cliff, I have something I have been working on. I have some potential training content that I want to create for you, but I really only want to create training that you actually need help with, right? So I've narrowed down the list to a few items, a few ideas, but I really want your vote on what to start with. So I've created trainings like how to use Facebook ads to promote, market, and sell your courses, how to use or set up WordPress to have your online course, how to outsource your course, as well as a whole course on marketing your existing or upcoming courses to increase your sales, and how to create additional revenue streams around your course. I've already identified over 20 different types of revenue streams that you could create just around your course idea. So I have a couple other ideas. I really want your input. If you go to onlinecoursecoach.com/vote, you can vote for your favorite and get a free bonus as a thank you for spending just a minute voting for your favorites. Well, hey, let's get right into the show. I have known Cliff Ravenscraft personally since about 2008, or maybe even before. It might have even been a few years before. I've hired him as a coach early on, have many common friends, and have listened to countless podcasts of his throughout the years. So I really feel like I know him, and a lot of that is because I have listened to his show for so long. So it was really fun having him on. And I think that speaks to the importance of podcasting and the benefits of podcasting is, yeah, he knows me. We've talked throughout the years at different conferences and different places, but I feel like I know him so much more because I've been listening to him for so many years. And so going into this interview, I had a set of questions and the direction that I wanted to go of what I wanted to talk to him about for this show. But as Cliff and I were talking before the show, he had a great idea to talk about something that he's never talked about on a podcast before. And that's what this episode is all about. So while we talk about podcasting and marketing and online courses and business and more, I really want you to listen to this episode slowly. And don't be afraid to pause it and write down his questions and his 11-step process, because I know that it could really explode your business and your impact. So it's funny, we talk about courses, but in his process, that is step number 8. All right. So we talk about really so many foundational aspects even before you get to your online course. And I love Cliff's excitement, his passion. We both share that same passion for helping people, teaching people, and seeing lives change. So it was really fun to have Cliff on. Some background about Cliff is that in December of 2005, Cliff began podcasting as a hobby. 1 year later, he launched podcastanswerman.com, where he has since helped tens of thousands of individuals and organizations successfully launch a podcast through one-on-one coaching and online courses. If you were to look at the top 100 podcasts in the business category of iTunes, more than 50 of these shows were created by clients who have been trained by Cliff. And today, Cliff focuses on his role as a business and life coach. He mentors coaches, consultants, and thought leaders through the transition from their unfulfilling day job to their own responsible and profitable online business so they can live the life of their dreams and do the work they feel most called to do in this world. So be sure to check out one of his next level workshops, and he talks about that at the end of his interview. So Cliff, thanks so much for being on the Online Course Coach podcast today.
Jeff, man, I am so glad we are finally connecting, talking to each other here, and what a privilege and honor it is to be a guest on your show. Thanks for having me.
So Cliff, you are one of the kings of podcasting, and you go back so far. So what does podcasting mean to you, and how has it catapulted your business over the years?
Oh my gosh. Well, it took a guy who nobody ever heard of from Northern Kentucky and built an audience of more than 1.5 million people around the world that if you brought up the topic of podcasting, they'd bring up the name Cliff Ravenscraft, right? I mean, it's a guarantee my name's going to come into the conversation for at least 1.5 million people in this world. And podcasting has done that.
With that, has that surprised you? You know, your background was not podcasting. You know, was it your goal to reach that many people, or did it just happen organically?
It all happened organically until it was intentional. So for me, podcasting started as a hobby. It was not something I needed to generate income from. My wife and I started a podcast as a hobby about the TV show Lost. And so there we were once a week talking about this television show. And then eventually we started a second episode a week where we did initial reaction right after watching it. And then we did a weekend show recapping everything we discovered online about the hidden clues and stuff. And what happened was we just enjoyed this. It was a time for Stephanie and I to get together and just have a fun conversation as a husband and wife, but about something that we were truly passionate about and that other people, hundreds of thousands of people around the world were passionate about. And as a result of that, people are like, man, you guys are talking about so many amazing things in your show. You guys are sharing so much inspirational information. It's like, wait a second, I thought you said it was about the TV show Lost. Well, the show itself had episodes called All Good Cowboys Have Daddy Issues, which of course, Stephanie had some daddy issues that she's dealt with in life. I had my own. We talk about those kind of things. There was an episode called Tabula Rasa, which means starting over with a clean slate. And so we got the opportunity to talk about, our own mistakes in the past and authentically sharing how through our faith, we were given the opportunity to start over with a clean slate, and that every day we start over with a clean slate, a tabula rasa, if you will. So people are like starting to listen to that show, and they were emailing me on a consistent basis and saying, Cliff, oh my gosh, as a result of what you and your wife shared, wow, that prompted this thought inside of me, and that thought has changed my life. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And people started asking us all kinds of questions that were not related to the TV show Lost, but I was actually answering in email form to all the people who were asking these questions like, hey, can you tell me more about this idea of living debt-free that you and your wife are talking about? Who's this Dave Ramsey guy, and how do I learn how to become debt-free? Those kind of questions. And so I started getting so many of those that we launched another podcast called Family from the Heart, which we did every single week all the way up until last year. So we did it for 12 years. And since then I had launched, I've done over 30 different podcast shows, over 3,700 podcast episodes with my voice in them. And after about 18 months, no, it was actually 12 months, I started a show called Podcast Answer Man because I realized, man, I could make a living teaching people how to podcast because people had been paying me already to do that. I was generating a couple $1,000s a month. And about 18 months into my journey, I said, hey, I wonder what life would be like if I actually did this full time and left my soul-sucking career as an insurance agent. And I did that. And since January 2008, I intentionally built this audience. So for me, it started out as a fluke. I had no idea, which, by the way, the TV show Lost had millions of people around the world When I started podcasting, we were the 6th or 7th podcast devoted to the TV show Lost. This is, by the way, this is December 2005. It's the first full year of podcasting in existence. There were only a few hundred podcasters in the world, and I was the 7th podcast devoted to the TV show Lost. So if that tells you anything about how popular this show was and the people that wanted to listen to it, this does not happen for practically anyone, but we had, I think it was 27,000 subscribers by the 3rd episode of that podcast. And we grew that one all the way over to 60 to 80,000 subscribers. I really didn't pay much attention once we got way into it, but yeah. That's how we got started. It took me by surprise at first, and then once I learned what really drew people in and what worked, it no longer was surprising to me. Which, by the way, I'd love to just say something real quickly, and I know we're going to talk more about online courses and some other stuff, but I'll just say this: my podcast. By the way, today I only do one podcast. And it's no longer called Podcast Answer Man. I rebranded it. It's called The Cliff Ravenscraft Show. And the number of subscribers who are subscribed to that show would shock anyone, especially if they saw how much money my business generates on an annual basis. You'd be shocked to learn how low the number of subscribers is. It's still in the thousands, but it's not quite as big as what you might think. But here's what I will tell you is that while there may only be several thousand people who listen to the Cliff Ravenscraft Show on a weekly basis, some of those people are people like Michael Hyatt, who listens on a weekly basis, who has access to hundreds of thousands of people, who he's consistently talking about me and the things that I share to people. There's a guy named Michael Stelzner who happens to have a mailing list with over 1 million people on it, and the number one social media business and blog in the world called Social Media Examiner, where as many as 6,000 people come every year to San Diego for his conference in the San Diego Conference Center. Convention Center. There's a guy named Pat Flynn. It's just a couple people, that are out there. These people have access to hundreds of thousands, up to 1 million people that are following them. And those people are, my audience basically is an audience mostly made up of massive influencers. So in a way, my podcast allows me to influence some of the biggest influencers in the world, at least in my niche, if you will, which is business owners, entrepreneurial focused type of people, leaning a little bit more on the bent of faith oriented, although I'm not a faith-based podcast. It's just that I am a person of faith. And so I have that audience. And so these people are the people that I influence. So when I say that, there are quite literally over 1.5 million people out there that if the topic of podcasting came up in conversation, I know for a fact they'd bring my name into the conversation because they've been conditioned that podcasting equals Cliff Ravenscraft.
Yeah.
That's the power of the influence and how this all works.
So let me make an assumption here. Let me ask you it this way. So since podcasting has been so good to you and you've been such an industry leader, you've helped, so many of the top podcasts get up and running. Do you have a formula or recommendation for when somebody should create a podcast? Should everyone create one? Or does it fall in a certain path when you're creating your online business or offline business?
Well, I used to say that everybody should have a podcast, but I don't believe that anymore. Matter of fact, some people probably be better off not to have a podcast. A podcast is only going to be awesome for you if you're an awesome person. Defined awesome as defined by me. And awesome means that you genuinely care about people. And by the way, I just want to say this. There are some very successful people in this world who have built businesses where, quite frankly, they're more concerned with algorithms and numbers and funnels and stuff like that. And the product and service that they create adds value to people's lives. But when it comes down to it, they are the type of person who really doesn't care to get to know the actual individual person who benefits from their product. You know what I'm saying? It's they kind of have that attitude. It's like, ain't nobody got time for that. There are those people out there, and I'm not saying those are not awesome people, but when I do think about awesome people, I'm talking about people who do genuinely care about people. Like every human being matters, and I wish I had time to invest in personally adding value to every single human being's life that ever purchased my product or service. That's my desire, although I realize I can't. And so therefore I adopt, the more success. This is from Andy Stanley. He's an American pastor. He once said, the more successful you become, the less accessible you'll have to become. It's just the law of numbers. You can't be there for everyone. So I adopted a philosophy that he created for himself. And he says, I always do for some what I wish I could do for everyone. Now, anybody who has that heart who genuinely cares about every human being that comes in contact with their content and would love to invest into each individual person's life. If you have that heart, I think you should have a podcast. You want to know why? Because that level of care and genuine authenticity, it's all going to come out in your voice.
Yeah.
But if you don't care about people, they're going to hear that too. And you'd be better off with a blog.
That's good.
All right.
Good.
So anyway, so there's that question about should everybody have a podcast, but when should you create one? Oh my gosh, let me tell you, I did what so many other people did. I started podcasting as a hobby, right? And then later down the road, I'm like, how do I monetize this thing? In fact, when I left my career in insurance, my first choice would not have been to leave my career in insurance and become the world's go-to leading authority for how to learn how to do the technical ins and outs of podcasting. That was not my first choice. My first choice would have been to simply get behind a microphone, create content that entertains, educates, encourages, and inspires others so that they take action and that their lives have so much value in it that I'm making a living doing that. And I couldn't figure out how to monetize that at the time. And I didn't believe it was possible, which, by the way, I'm actually doing that today. But I didn't believe it was possible back then. And so I'm like, how do I monetize this? How do I monetize this? And that's the problem that I've seen with so many people. Cliff, I've been podcasting for 18 months. I've been podcasting for 2.5 years. And here's the deal. I just can't figure out how to monetize this thing. And that's because they did what most people do. By the way, I have developed a framework after working with, I don't know if you know this, Jeff, but I've actually personally helped over 100,000 people launch a podcast. Wow. There are only 750,000 podcasts in existence today. And I've personally helped over 100,000 of those people launch their podcast.
Nice.
So I've learned a couple things about what works and what doesn't, who's successful in their goals and desires of monetization. And what I learned is there's actually an 11-step process, and I'll be happy to share that with you guys. People normally pay me $2,000 for this information, but I'm going to give it to you here for free. Here's what I want to tell you. Most people start with step number 8, which is start your podcast or create content. By the way, step number 8 is actually called create content. And step number 8 is also your website. So let me tell you this. If you are out there today and you already have a podcast, you already have a blog, you're already creating social media content, you already have a mailing list, you already have a website, but you don't have a product that people have already paid you money for, you actually started with step number 8 in the process. And it's one of the reasons why you're failing to generate the amount of income you want to generate. So what I'd love to tell you is if I had to start it all over today, which, by the way, I've had the privilege now of helping hundreds of people, because today I'm no longer seen as the podcast answer man. I kind of am divorcing myself from that brand. I'm very thankful for where it's brought me, but there's more that I want to offer to the world, and I want to be seen more in helping people take their business and their actual life to the next level, not just their podcast to the next level. So anyway, I want to share with you a step-by-step process that if you were to go through this, I've seen it work in hundreds of people's lives. Like literally, I had somebody who came to my next level workshop 3 weeks ago, and they're already generating serious income from a $649 product.
Wow.
Okay. So how would we start this? Step number 1 is, first of all, you want to actually dream big dreams. Determine what is your outcome. A lot of people think, Jeff, I want to have a business. I want to start generating income. You know what? That's not what people that's not really what people want. Did you know that? Mm-hmm. Instead, what they want is what that business is going to do for them, what that income is going to do for them. So, or how it's going to make them feel. So the important thing, step number one, is to determine why are you doing this in the first place? Because let me ask you this: if money were no option or object, if you already were a multi-billionaire, financially wealthy, you didn't have to work another day in your life, would you create the business you're about ready to create? Most people would say no, if they were honest.
Yeah. So that's tough. It's a tough question. It's a process to go through.
Exactly. So the first thing is to actually ask yourself, well, why do I want this? What is my desired outcome? What do I want my life to look like? And so this is what I recommend that you do first. Here's the craziest thing. All right, I want you to determine the life of your dreams. What does that mean? How many hours a week are you working? That's a question to ask yourself. The next question is, what kind of things do I want to be able to do in my life? How many do I want to be able to take my family on, a 2 or 4 week vacation once a year or every other year to Europe or other places and travel the world and be able to do that, have that kind of lifestyle to do that with them? Do I want to be able to have the freedom financial and the margin financially so that I'm completely 100% debt free? But also, let's just say some kind of medical emergency comes up with my family and I don't actually ever have this thought that, wow, what if financial inconvenience my child has become as a result of this medical concern? How terrible. I mean, I don't know about you, Jeff, but those thoughts have crossed my mind. I know it's terrible, but it's like, oh my gosh, why did you break your arm? I mean, do you know how much this is? I don't say these words, but inside your head, you're like, I don't have the money for this.
Right.
I never want to be in that place again. So you want to have enough financial margin in your life so that if the worst case scenario, there's money there and it doesn't drive you crazy. You're not anxiety. It doesn't cause fights with you and your spouse. What kind of life do you want? So the first step I have people do is I want you to dream big dreams. I want you to write down, what are all of your expenses? How much money do you have to make just to make all the bills met? I mean, worst case scenario, how much must you make just to make ends meet? But don't stop there. I want you to dream bigger and say, okay, now you've got the needs, you've got a dollar figure associated with that, but I want you to add on the things you'd like. How much money would you like to be giving away? How much money would you like to donate to this? How much money would you like to be able to do that traveling that you want to do? How much money would you like to be, saving on a consistent basis? Add all of that stuff in there, and then there's a whole lot more that goes into this. This is a whole nother conversation for another time. But then, how do you turn that from a desire to something you must generate? And that's a whole different process. But the idea is, step number one is you want to determine how much money your business must generate and how much work are you willing to do to generate it. That's the first step. Most people, the first step they do is like, let's create a podcast and work really hard. Jeff, do you know how many people I know that spend 6 to 10 hours a week every single week on their podcast and have done it for 6 to 9 months and haven't generated a penny? And they're
probably
just a lot. And
Man,
some people, dude, that's me. Yeah, that is you. And the reason why is because you went straight to step number 8. You have no idea why you're creating that content. So step number 1 is determine your dream life. What do you want it to be, and what must your business generate? Otherwise, what you're doing is wasting your time. That's exactly what I want you to think about. You are wasting your time if you're not generating a minimum of that amount, because you said yourself, the reason why I want this is to live this life. This is the life I feel called to do. This is the life I feel I want to be that guy who's able to step in and meet a financial need whenever it arises around me and my heart compels me to give. If that's what you want, then set it. All right, so that's step number 1. You got that?
Yes, I do.
All right, step number 2 is to identify where you're already adding value in people's lives. So first question is, are people already coming to you and seeking your advice related to whatever business you're thinking of doing? Another question is, and by the way, if so, I want you to write down like the top 10 things people come and ask you. When they're seeking your advice, I want you to write down the top 10 topics that come to mind. When people seek your advice, what are they asking you advice about? This is going to be very revealing, by the way. All right. The second thing is what are your, I want you to write down a list. In fact, I want you to create an inventory. I want you to take a notebook, a journal, write down what are your gifts, your talents, your passions, and your areas of expertise. And also, let's just throw in all of your experience as well. So, for example, I made a list of this. Like, for example, I have, when I was an insurance agent, I had more than 12 years of the most dynamic sales and marketing training you could possibly imagine. So when actually somebody hires me as a mentor or a coach for their business, not only do I have the technical aspects of podcasting and social media, building a community, having a network of friends, successfully selling online courses, all of those other things, I also have 12 years of sales and marketing training. I know more about sales and marketing that could radically alter your life in a 45-minute conversation. You may have paid, by the way, today people pay me $1,500 for just a 1-hour conversation. And I've had people like within 1 hour, instantly within that conversation, walk away and generate $10,000 to $15,000 worth of income as a result of a conversation. That's what I bring to the table. So do you have any experience, any skills that you bring to the table? You want to actually make a list of everything you bring to the table, an inventory of what you bring to the table. And then do that first. Create your own inventory. And then I want you to think of, let's just say at least 10 to 20 people in your life that find value in who you are and what you do. All right. And by the way, this may not be professionally, whatever. This is just people that have naturally found value in just being closely connected to you in some way, shape, or form. In fact, Jeff, you said earlier before we hit the record button, you've been listening to my podcast since 2008 or earlier. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
You would be a perfect person for me to send 6 questions to. Now, I don't want you to answer these questions, but I'm going to say these 6 questions. And the one thing that I love about podcasting, most of you are listening with some sort of podcast app that has a rewind 7 seconds or 10 seconds or 15-second button. You'll want to do the work. I don't want Jeff to go and put all these things and transcribe all this into his show notes. But you can get these 6 questions if you just go back and listen to this enough. But here's the 6 questions you should be sending to people like Jeff in my case. So Jeff, if I were to send you an email based upon the fact that since 2008 or earlier, you've consistently been, have I added value to your life, by the way?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I hired you early on, but then listening to you through the years, I mean, oh, absolutely. Yep.
So knowing that I've added value to your life, I know that if I asked you these 6 questions, you would hit reply on the email and you would answer all 6 of them. Mm-hmm. There's no question in my mind that you would do it. Here are the 6 questions you want to send to about 10 to 20 people. Question number 1, what are my 3 to 5 unique qualities? Question number 2, what value do you get from connecting with me? Question number 3, what do you think is my professional strength? Question number 4, what do you think is my personal strength? Question number 5, what attribute is unique to me and separates me from all of the others? Question number 6, what is one quality that I seem to undervalue that you think I should be more bold about sharing?
It's good.
So and by the way, this is step number 2 still. The whole idea is finding out, getting some kind of clue of who you are, where you're already adding value, what people are seeing in you. And also it's coming to this place where you want to discover what is your, and I've learned it's called zone of genius.
Yeah. Zone of genius.
And man, when I discovered the zone of genius, my life was radically changed. Like in an instant, it was changed. This is a term that I learned from a guy named Gay Hendricks. He wrote a book called The Big Leap. All right. And by the way, I interviewed Gay Hendricks on my podcast, episode 519. You can find it at, I'm going to tell you, I used to be known as Podcast Answer Man. It's mindsetanswerman.com/519. I'm trying to recondition people to see me as the Mindset Answer Man these days. So I love it. Mindsetanswerman.com/519. That's my interview with Gay Hendricks. Go read his book. Discover. Step number 2, use all of the things that I just said. Make your own inventory first, then add to your inventory the responses that you get from those 6 questions from the 10 to 20 people you send it to, and then read the book, The Big Leap.
Yeah.
It'll change your life. All right. So then what you do is once you've discovered your zone of genius and how you want to help people, now you're ready to move to step number 3. Step number 3 is determine your exact ideal customer. And by the way, this is where most people mess up. By the way, if you started with step number 8, I want to promise you this. Most of you probably have a podcast where you've attracted people who are not your exact ideal customer.
Or even a course. People might have a course that they think their audience is A, but it's actually B.
Yep. Exactly. And by the way, this is step number 3. This is how I walk them through it. You want to identify, number 1, people with money. So, by the way, if your target audience are teenagers, not a lot of them have money, or if they do, it's usually not the kind they're willing to part with for your online course. But that could be a limiting belief as well. We won't go there. Anyway, number 1, you want to identify people. The biggest ones, the people who say, "Well, my target audience are people who are hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and are sick and fed up." It's like, yeah, okay. Anyway,
probably not going to work.
Okay, identify people with money who have a problem that they are willing to pay to have solved. That you can and want to solve. This is every single word that I just spoke is extremely important. Number 1, people with money. Those people who have money, they have to have a problem that they are willing to pay to have solved. There's a lot of people who have a problem, they're just not willing to pay to have it solved. So just because you have a course that solves their problem, you got to find the people who are willing to pay to have that problem solved. And by the way, you may be excellent. You may be awesome and know exactly how to solve that person's problem. So therefore you can solve it. But guess what? You also need to want to solve it. Because if you don't, just because you can solve it, you'll have no problem creating the course. But if you don't want to solve it for them bad enough, you'll suck at marketing. Anyway, we'll move on to so basically that's step number 3. Step number 4, you need to learn about your ideal customer's problems. And the best way to do this is through conversations. If you have a very small to no audience at all, you just have conversations with people who kind of fit your ideal customer. That person who has money, who has a problem that they're willing to pay. You need to have you need to figure out who that is. Like, is it small business owners? Is it people who are looking to build online courses, for example, like Jeff is doing here, right? So you need to find out who those people are. Go find one person who fits that description and have a conversation with them. And by the way, if you have any number of people, that is a group of people, you might even be able to do a survey. But in the conversations that you have one-on-one or in the survey, there is one question that is the best question you could ever ask. And so, Jeff, your target audience are people who want to build online courses, right?
Right.
All right. So Jeff would ask this question: what is the single greatest struggle you face when it comes to building your online course? By the way, the question is the same for everyone. What is the single greatest struggle you face when it comes to fill in the blank? So for me, mine is, let's just say my target audience are people who are trying to successfully leave behind a lifetime as an employee. All right. And they're looking to build their own business, whether they've just started the business on the side or whether they've already left their day job because they got fired because they just weren't so into it anymore and the boss got sick of them not being into it. There's all kinds of spectrum. Or the people who have been they're working like 70 hours a week full time in their business, but they're just barely eking by. Most of those people are struggling with the fact that they still have the employee mindset. So for me, my question is, what is the single greatest struggle you face when it comes to wrapping your mind around being a business owner? Or what is your single greatest struggle you face when it comes to generating income in your business? I could ask that question a number of different ways, but the thing is what you want to learn, what is the single greatest struggle? Now, what you're going to get in response to that is you're going to get a list of problems. So self-confidence comes up, for example, in mine. Not enough time at the end of the day to get things done. I've got too many things, but I can't figure out which one to do next. I mean, I actually have asked this question to thousands of people, and I have thousands of answers. So I have, and by the way, even though I have thousands of answers from thousands of people, guess what? I only have a list of hundreds of problems, because a lot of people have the same problem. Now, the thing is I don't have enough time at the end of the day. That's the problem. In step number 4, when you're learning about your customers' problems, you don't want to just learn about their problem. You need to explore what pains they have that are associated to that problem. So here's the problem. I work all day at the day job. I come home, and by the end of, time with dinner with the family, and then I sit down and it's like, man, I've got so much to do. I don't even know what to do. That's the problem. And I feel overwhelmed. And I just don't have enough time. Well, what pain is associated? I'm not having sex with my wife anymore. Boom. Difference between a pain and a problem. Do you get the difference?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it's kind of an activity I do is kind of the so what game, So a lot of times it's, okay, I come home, I don't have any time for my family. So what? And then they say, well, maybe it's a sex thing. Maybe it's I can't get any, headway in my business. And you keep asking that so what question. And a lot of times that will get you to the root cause, of what's actually either holding them back or, whatever that issue can be.
And you'll want to make sure that you pay attention to the exact language that they use when they talk about their pains. Exact phrases, the exact way that they phrased their expression of that pain. Because those things you'll want to write down, because you'll use that in your sales material much later in this process.
Yeah.
So step number 4, learn about your ideal customer's problem. Step number 5 is now you determine what types of products and services will you offer to your target audience. All right. I suggest everyone start with one-on-one coaching. Everyone start with one-on-one coaching. Here's the thing. You may actually have your target audience. You've done some conversations, you've done some surveys, you found a problem. You now know people who have money, who have a problem that they're willing to pay for, and you can and want to solve it. So most people, what do? They instantly jump in to create that 6-week course, and it's going to take them 3 months to create it. Well, guess what? The problem is you are so well skilled and well suited to answer that problem. This problem is so easy for you to solve for them because you covered that problem years ago. For example, for me, my first year from, going from my career as an insurance agent into being full-time self-employed, that was 2008. That was 10 years ago. All right. That was 10 years ago. And I'll be honest with you, Jeff, I have learned a lot over the last 8 or 9 years that have radically changed my success in my business, the way that I think, the way that I do things. And to be quite frank with you, I've forgotten a lot of the struggle from 2008.
Sure.
Some of it's intentional. And the reality is if I was to build a course without actually getting reconnected to people who are currently in that first year of their business, it's called the curse of the familiar. You'll leave out all the basic stuff. You'll be talking high level stuff, and they're like, yeah, that's all great. I get that, but you don't understand. It's like, oh yeah, I do remember that feeling. I do remember that doubt. I do remember not getting any sleep that night because I thought I was having a heart attack. Yeah, I remember the panic attacks. Wow. Maybe I should include that in my course. See, the thing is when you work with people one-on-one, you'll actually learn what it is people need to know, more of the basic stuff that you would have actually overlooked. So I encourage you to start out with some one-on-ones. By the way, We're going to get into some other things here in just a second about validating your product, but that's another great way to validate your product, to see if somebody, can you get just one person to hire you as a coach for an hour to talk about solving that problem? Dude, that right there is some indicator of whether or not maybe creating a course is a good idea. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so that's step number 5 is products and services. And of course, from one-on-one, then I recommend starting, moving into some of the core online courses and other digital products, other group coaching, other things you could do. Anyway.
Well, let me interrupt you real quick, because I think you brought up a really interesting point about a lot of times the expert forgets what the beginner needs to know. They forget that first couple steps. And I think that is one of the biggest things that I see with course creators, with teachers, with experts is that very thing. They're thinking, I'm going to teach, my 10 years of experience to an audience that is in day 1. And like you said, that just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. It frustrates and confuses. So I'm just glad that you brought that up, because that is such a critical thing when people are creating training material for a beginner audience.
Yeah, I remember when I was doing one-on-one, people would hire me it's like, Cliff, how do I use Adobe Audition to edit my podcast? Mm-hmm. And by the way, if I would have just gone straight into I could have created a video tutorial in 2 hours on how to do this. It's like, okay, so the first thing that you do is you load up your WAV file. And as soon as you do that, and it's like, by the way, when I did this one-on-one, it's like, Cliff, what's a WAV file?
Right.
Oh. Okay, so a WAV file is a file that is uncompressed. It's got the original, it's a large file because it has every single bit of every sound that's there represented in this massive form. And it's like, what's an MP3 file then? Because you said the ultimate thing we want is an MP3 file. Well, an MP3 file is a file. So it's like, what? You didn't know this? Of course they didn't know this. It's like, okay. And so I'm like, okay, so the first thing we're going to do is take the selection tool. It's like, what's the selection tool? And it's like, oh yeah. Okay. So I was so happy. For me, I was thrilled that I worked with like 15, 20 people teaching them how to do Adobe Audition one-on-one, and got all of those basic questions, so that by the time I actually created my actual recorded tutorial as a downloadable product, I knew all of the basics that needed to be in there. So exactly what you just said. All right. Step number 6 in the process is to create your value proposition statement. This is basically your elevator pitch. For example, mine is this. My name is Cliff Ravenscraft. I'm a business and life coach. I mentor coaches, consultants, and thought leaders through the transition from their unfulfilling day job to their own profitable online business, so that they can live the life of their dreams and do the work they feel most called to do in this world. The question is somebody asks you, what do you do for a living? The idea is, do you have an answer that you can come up with off the top of your... By the way, I never recite that word for word for people.
Sure.
There's a version of that on the homepage of my website at cliffravenscraft.com, but it's not even word for word that. But that's the basis. The thing is, though, Jeff, is the important thing is that you create a value proposition. This is how I propose that I add value to the world. Okay? The question is, who am I? What's my professional identity? What problem do I solve for people? How do I solve it? And why do I solve it? Those are the questions. By the way, you guys can hit the rewind button, go back and get those questions. So the idea is that when I tell you who I am, I'm a business coach. I help people who have lived a lifetime as an employee escape their unfulfilling day job and create a profitable online business so that they can live the life of their dreams. I might say that. Now, I can tell you right now, there are one of 3 responses that I want to happen as a result of me saying that statement. Number 1, if the person happens to be somebody who is stuck in an unfulfilling day job, I want them to say, oh my gosh, that's me. Tell me, how do you help people like me? The second option is if they're not that person, but they know somebody. The second option I want to happen is, oh my gosh, my husband needs to talk to you. Or it's like, my brother needs to talk to you. Or the third one is like, oh, that's interesting. And then they forget about it until 3 weeks later, they go out to lunch with a friend who's confessing, I hate this job and I feel so unfulfilled. And they think, oh my gosh, you need to talk to Cliff Ravenscraft. You see what I'm saying? That's the 3 options. So the question is are you able to, in one statement, with confidence and congruency, state exactly who you are, how you add value to people's lives, who you help, how you help them, what you help them to do, and why. All of those things. So that's your value proposition statement. Then step number 7 is you've got your product or service. You're telling people who you are, how you help. They ask, oh, well, how can I get some of that? Then step number 7 is to validate your product, or actually validate your business model. So make it a goal to get your first paid customer in step number 7. Your product is not validated until at least one person has paid you money to solve that problem that your product or service solves. So it's not a validated product until you've actually had somebody who's paid you. I think one-on-one is the best way to start out. Just do a 1 hour one-on-one call, or maybe you do a coaching package. Like, listen, 3 calls for X number of dollars. And start out there. As soon as one person pays you, then instantly you know that there's going to be other people who are just like that who will also pay you. Now, some people say, Cliff, I just want to build this course. I'm like, okay, tell me how long will it take you to build that course? It's usually 2 to 3 months, if they're being realistic. And it's like, okay, how about instead of spending the next 2 or 3 months building a product that's not been validated, which means nobody's ever paid you, so you have no idea once it's done if anybody's going to pay you, right?
Right.
Oh, no, you don't understand. They told me they want it. It's like, did they tell you with their dollars?
Exactly.
No, they didn't. So now you want to validate this before you waste 2 to 3 months of your life. So here's what I recommend. And Jeff, I'm sure you've probably recommended this as well, but why not go ahead and determine what your online course is going to be and decide to deliver it live over the course of the 2 to 3 months through, let's just say 2 webinars per week for 3 or 6 weeks or whatever the case may be. Create the outline of the course, create the sales page, launch it 6 weeks from now, and by golly, spend the next 6 weeks not creating the course, but spend the next 6 weeks marketing it, selling it, and getting people to buy and give you money for that course so that by the time the course starts, you've already got at least 5, 10, 15, 20 people who have paid you money. Now, all of a sudden, the motivation to create that course, I promise you, once you got people's money, that you are going to be motivated to create that content for each of those webinars that you're going to teach.
Absolutely.
And then you deliver it live and you record it. And after it's recorded, you go back and do some post-production editing, and you have yourself an awesome course that has been validated. That, my friends, is step number 7. And by the way, once you've done step number 7, then you can go to step number 8, which is content creation. By the way, this is where I suggest people create their website.
Nice.
Wait, but Cliff, didn't you say you wanted a sales page for that thing? Yeah, and you don't need a website to get a sales page. A sales page is a single HTML page. You can get those anywhere, and a URL that points to it. A buy now button. Don't go creating your logo for your website. You know how many people are wasting their time on their logos of their website? And guess what? You haven't even validated that that's the right product that you're going to sell.
But I've got to get T-shirts and business cards and mugs and pens and,
Exactly. So you want to wait until people have paid you money before you invest any time, effort, energy into building your website or creating your mailing list or even starting your blog, your podcast, your YouTube channel, your Facebook live stream schedule. All that stuff is step number 8 after you have received money proving that your product or service is valid. And then step number 9 is to grow your audience or attract your ideal customer through all kinds of different things you could do. Step number 10 is once you've done that, you want to continually market your products and services to those people that you have gained as an audience. You want to do that in an effective way. And the most effective way is to build relationships with those people and serve them regardless if they will ever pay you money. Care about people genuinely. And then step number 11, once you've done all of that, you've got some good systems in place where people are consistently coming and buying your products and services. Step number 11 is now it's time to go back to the beginning, do some more questions and surveys, find some more problems and pains, and build new products and services and start all over again.
Oh, Cliff, that's so good. It's so deep. That's a rewindable episode. What you've said so far is just fantastic. So thank you for that. That's so good. There's so many questions I could pull out of that, but I have a couple I want to hit on. So I find that you're one of the best people I know at creating authentic relationships with your audience, with people. I mean, you're just so good at naturally connecting. And so how does somebody build or cultivate that engaged audience? You said step number 10 deals with that a little bit. Do you have any strategies? Is it a natural thing, or how have you found success in that area?
You know how I just gave you basically what I just gave you, the 11-step process for building a product, that was one 1-hour session of my next level workshop. I have an entire 1-hour session on answering the question you just asked me. And unfortunately, I don't have another hour to give it to you. But if I could just summarize it in a brief question, knowing that I'm going to do no justice whatsoever to your question in even a 2-minute response, it's genuinely care about people. I'm telling you, every one person matters. When people email me, over the years as a podcast consultant, and trust me, I've worked with lots of people as a podcast consultant, the number one question people have is like, Cliff, I've been podcasting for 6 months and I only have insert number of downloads per episode. I don't, and by the way, some of those people where I only have 10,000 downloads per episode. I've been podcasting for 6 months and I only have 10,000 downloads per episode. I had some people, I've been podcasting for 6 months and I only have 3,000 downloads per episode. And I have people who say, Cliff, I've been podcasting for 6 months and I only have about 100 downloads per episode. And I'm like, yep, that's your problem. And they're like, what? What you just said, that's your problem. And they're like, I what did I say? I said, well, first of all, the word only is some kind of indicator of how you feel about those people. And by the way, the fact that you call them downloads is like, Jeff, do you listen to my show ever?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I've never called you a download, my friend. Right. You're not a download.
That's good.
Yeah, you're not a download. Michael Hyatt listens to my show on a pretty consistent basis, and he's not a download. Dan Miller listens to my show. He's not a download. These people are not downloads. And by the way, even if they're not big name people, nobody is a download. They're a human being. And it's like, dude, I've been putting out my show for 6 months and I already have 100 people who show up every single week to hear every syllable of every word I say. This is so incredible. How can I get more of this?
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, if you actually had that question instead of the first question, you wouldn't have to ask me the question.
Nice.
Okay. Rewind that one back and listen to it 3 times and see if it hits.
I mean, you can apply the same thing with your email list, with your courses. If you're thinking of them as subscribers or students, if you kind of just think of, hey, I want to grow my numbers, then I would agree with you that you're thinking about it incorrectly. And so, yeah, just thinking about them as individuals and not numbers is a huge step in the right direction.
That's the first step. And of course, there's so many other things you could do to market and grow your audience. But the first thing I can tell you is I get this one as well. Gosh, Cliff, I've been podcasting and I get absolutely no engagement from my audience. I've been doing this for a year and I don't get any engagement from my audience. And my question back to them is like, number one, I don't believe that's a lie. I mean, unless you're terrible, I believe that is a bold-faced lie that you believe. I don't think you're lying. I don't think you're intentionally lying to me, but you're lying to yourself. And so like, what are you talking? I don't actually say it that bold. Sure. I can easily say it from this way, but I do somewhat call them out on it in a more gentle way. But here's the question I ask. It's like, listen, okay, so you've been podcasting for a year, or you've been creating content. It doesn't have to be a podcast. It could be a blog, social media, Facebook Live, YouTube. It doesn't matter. After 1 year, are you telling me you haven't received one comment on any piece of content you've ever produced? Not one single email. Not one person has ever emailed you. Not one person has ever left a comment. Well, yeah, it happens occasionally. It's like, well, what did you do with those people? Well, give me an example. If you could just remember one person over the past, 365 days that has left you any comment. Well, there was this one person who says, hey, thank you so much for creating this content. It really means a lot to me. This episode was very helpful. Well, let's go back and look at your response to that person. And of course, if I'm working with them one-on-one at the time, I'm like, I'll wait. Seriously, I want to see what you wrote back to that person. And that response is usually, oh, wow, thank you so much. So glad you're listening. Hope you have a great week. What? You want more of that?
Right.
Dude, go back to every person who's written you a comment or an email in the last year. They're still there, by the way. Gmail, it's in your Gmail archives. It's in the comments section on your YouTube channel or whatever, your social media posts. Go back and rekindle the conversation. It's like, hey, wow, you know what? When you told me this, I totally neglected to ask, hey, what's going on in your life that this spoke into? I'm really interested in learning more. Why? Just ask a question. Basically, every single person who ever responds to you, respond with a question, never with a statement. Always respond with a question. Carry the conversation forward. And people will say, well, Cliff, that's just not scalable. Well, you just told me you don't get any engagement. You didn't tell me you're getting so much engagement. How do I handle all this stuff? Right, I'm telling you how to get more, but you're telling me you don't want more because you're afraid of more. And eventually you get to the place like, yeah, you get more than you can handle. I'm at that place, but you know what? Every single day I do for some what I wish I could do for everyone.
Yeah.
And as I do that, I get more and more engagement. People's like, gosh, I talked to Cliff Ravenscraft wrote me an email and he must have spent like 2.5 hours writing that one email. And guess what? He did. I did. I do that at least once or twice a week. I will spend hours replying to an email. I don't do that for everyone, but I tell you what, it makes a huge difference in the lives of those I choose to do it in randomly whenever I feel compelled to do so in my heart, not so that person will ultimately buy my product or service one day, but because that's the person who God laid on my heart today. This is the person I should invest my time in right now.
Yeah. When it goes back to, I wasn't taking notes because I didn't want my keyboard, clicking and clacking. I'm going to go back and do the show notes. But one of your initial steps in your 11-step process was to ask questions. And so when you are getting these emails, these, blog comments or YouTube or whatever, that's an easy way to ask questions back. I love that you said that. That's one thing I do in almost every email correspondence is just ask what they're working on or ask what they're doing. And so I like the question you asked about, how did this content kind of speak into you or help or encourage you? I think that's a really good way to phrase that.
Yeah, I have so many more valuable insights on how to increase your engagement, how to grow your audience. It all centers around serving people, loving people, caring about people. I'll share with you one more. It's an extremely popular way. Matter of fact, George B. Thomas, he's even getting a shout out in your podcast. Okay? I don't even know if you know the name George B. Thomas.
I don't.
But he works with Marcus Sheridan. They do some HubSpot related stuff together. Yep. Anyway, George B. Thomas. So by the way, I'm shining the spotlight on him to indicate the value of shining the spotlight on your audience as a method of actually showing that you care, which has the effect of actually growing your audience. So this is like Inception here. All right. So here's the deal. George B. Thomas recently was interviewed on somebody else's podcast. And in the podcast, at the very beginning of the episode, he gave me a huge shout out, shining the spotlight on me as his inspiration and the person who gave him the number one, the inclination to start a podcast and the information of how to do it. And he gave me a wonderful shout out, named my name, named my brand, and how I helped him. Basically gave my old value. See, I'm not the podcast answer man anymore, right. But he still gave my old value prop. He did my value proposition statement better than I normally did. So he shined the spotlight on me. And guess what happened? In that episode, the person who interviewed him said, hey, here, he put it on Facebook. Hey, here's the interview with George B. Thomas. And by the way, in this episode, George mentioned so-and-so, 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 and so-and-so. And every person that was mentioned in that episode by George was linked, including my name. So I got a notification on Facebook that I was given a shout out. Now, I had never heard of this podcast that George B. Thomas was interviewed on. And as a result of that, I'm like, hey, I wonder what this is. So I went and found the podcast, downloaded it, and listened for where I got the shout out. As a result of that, number one, the podcast got a download. And George B. Thomas got my appreciation. And now here I am talking about George B. Thomas. Do you see how just basically shining the spotlight? And now I'm shining the spotlight on George B. Thomas. And I bet you, I know for a fact, Jeff, there are people, even if I do nothing with this, there are people who listen to your show who know George B. Thomas. And you know what's going to happen? As a result of me shining the spotlight on how awesome George B. Thomas is and how he gives credit to people who have influenced and gave value in his life, now George B. Thomas is going to be notified by at least 10 or 15 people. It's like, did you hear what Cliff Ravenscraft said about you in his interview with Jeff Long on that podcast? And he's going to go search for this episode.
Nice.
You see where I'm, and who knows? And all of a sudden, George may actually start telling other people about how Cliff Ravenscraft told. It goes on and on and on, my friend. This is just the beginning. There's so much more, more. And by the way, and it's so much more effective when you're doing it because you genuinely care about people like George B. Thomas than as a marketing ploy to try to get more downloads.
You know, Cliff, I can tell you love this. I can tell you're very competent at this, and I can hear it in your voice. You know, it's funny. I've had some family members of mine that say that they've listened to the podcast and they say, you know, Jeff, you sound a little different. You know, you sound more excited, more enthusiastic. And not that I'm this boring guy in real life. You know, I love my family, I love my life and all that, but when you're passionate about something, it comes through in your voice. And so I appreciate that about you, that you can tell you're a fountain of wisdom and knowledge. So I really appreciate you giving us these insights. I know you could speak for hours and hours more, but to respect your time, I won't hold you to that. But tell me a little bit about how you're helping people now with your workshops and other materials.
Yeah, so the material that I shared here today was just a portion of it. You talked about I can help people for hours. So I have this one. It's called Building an Online Business, a Next Level Workshop. You can find it, by the way, at nextlevelworkshop.info. So if you want information about the Next Level Workshop, it's nextlevelworkshop.info. Anyway, this is a 1.5 day event held here in my home, which I've actually built a home. It's called the home that podcasting built. We built a huge home, and inside our home, I built a training facility. So I teach people in my home in a classroom. So it's a 1.5 day event. The first day is literally 18 hours. And I'm like hardcore. I mean, what you got is just a taste of what happens in that. But it's basically how to build a profitable and successful online business around your passion, especially if you want to create online courses and digital products and do coaching and teaching and public speaking. And if that's your jam, that's what I help people do. So that's at nextlevelworkshop.info. Another thing that I've got going on is people who really struggle with the mindset. It's like, I just don't, that's great that Jeff does this. It's great that Cliff does this. They seem like they know what their passion is. I just don't even know. Or there's some people who know what their passion is. If you were to ask, man, what would life be like if I could do fill in the blank instead? They know what that thing is that they would rather do with their life. They just struggle believing it's possible. And for those people, I actually have an event. It's my own Tony Robbins style event. I'm so inspired by Tony Robbins, not by his language that he uses in his live events, but more of the technologies and the teachings and helping people change their beliefs about who they are and what they're able to achieve. I love that aspect of it. So I'm creating my own version of an Unleash the Power event. An Unleash the Power Within event, which I've been to once and going back again with my kids this July. But I'm creating my own version of it called Free the Dream. And that's coming up on September 7th, 8th, and 9th in Franklin, Tennessee. And it's helping people free the dream inside of them. Those who actually know what the dream is and are just struggling to make it a reality, I believe I can help them. I honestly believe I can help them understand what limiting beliefs are keeping them from living the lives for which they were created. And for those who don't even believe there's a dream inside of them, I'm convinced that there is. I believe each and every one of us are created for a purpose, and that dream is inside of you. And this event will help you unleash that dream, to free that dream inside of you, so you can begin to pursue the life for which you were created, so that when you wake up in the morning, you're excited to get out of bed. And that's at freethedream.live is the conference. So yeah, those are the two things. nextlevelworkshop.info, freethedream.live.
Well, Cliff, again, I can't thank you enough for being on the show here today, giving us your wisdom, motivating, encouraging, and helping all of us. So, Cliff, thanks for being on the Online Course Coach podcast today.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview as much as I did. Like I said at the beginning, I had a different direction, a set of questions. I was going to talk about, podcasting and marketing and authenticity and all that stuff. And we covered that. But I'm so glad Cliff went deep into those 11 steps. Every time I listen to Cliff, I get encouraged and motivated, and I'm sure you did as well. And that's really his podcasting mentorship. As I listen to him, I consider him a mentor and a friend. But that's one of the reasons why this podcast exists that I have is to really encourage, motivate, and help you. So I hope you pass that along if you have your own podcast or on your podcast interviews, that you are really engaged with the audience, engaged with how you can help people learn and grow. So I don't want these 11 steps to scare you away. If you haven't thought about these initial questions, maybe you're off to the races and you want to create a course, it's okay if you already have a course. But I know it would help if you go back and you review these 11 steps to ensure that you're truly on the right path. Because I can help you, create an online course. Obviously, that's what the coaching there is for. If you go to onlinecoursecoach.com, you can learn more about my coaching services. But I would rather you skip that or stop where you are and determine and ensure that you're on the right path and doing those steps before I help you with your course. So it's okay if you hit pause, on your course, on the direction you're going. If you need to change some things, maybe you are going in that right direction, and that's fantastic. But maybe there's a few of you that need to hit pause on your course, pause on your business, go back to those 11 steps, make sure that you are going in the right direction so that when you do a course, when you do one-on-one coaching or group coaching, you can really be on the right path for success. So I hope this entire episode was as encouraging to you as it was to me. Hey, don't forget to vote for the upcoming training at onlinecoursecoach.com/vote. And as a thank you for taking that short survey, you get a free download there. So check that out as well. Well, hey, thanks for coming back to the show. Hey, if you haven't left a rating or review in iTunes or other libraries or whatever, like Google and so many others, if you're using iTunes, just go to the iTunes app or go to onlinecoursecoach.com/iTunes. And I'd be honored if you'd leave a rating and review. Tell me how you've benefited from this podcast, what you like about this podcast, and that will help others listen to the show and find the show as well. Well, hey, keep coming back to this podcast, but make sure that you are moving towards building your business, building your course, growing your audience, and helping more people. Because as you know, it is my goal to help you to teach many that will impact millions.